right, well, I am going to introduce the charming, handsome, and incredibly talented Richie Hoffmann.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to Sewanee for having me. Thank you to old and new friends for teaching me so much this week. I learned such an incredible amount here about poetry, but also friendship. I leave this place physically decrepit, but artistically renewed. I'm going to read some poems from my new book, 100 Lovers. Even though it's called 100 Lovers, it's a book about marriage. Spring wedding. The day before we married, we napped in the afternoon with no sheets over us, and felt the breeze from the lake on our backs and butts and legs. It felt different, a small rebellion, though we've slept in one another's arms for 10 years, like little beasts, vulnerable and hairy, with saliva on our skin. The next day, we were men again. Ironed shirts, knotted ties of silk, deodorant, parted hair, promises. We will have children. We will buy another house. One of us will get cancer. All of our parents will die. A friend wanted me to read that at her wedding, but she said her parents would be too freaked out. This next poem is crude, but educational. It's called The Fables. In school, we read a ridiculous story by Aesop, one not involving wise or foolish animals or insects, but one in which a god allocates emotions to the parts of the body, intellect to the mind, love to the heart, etc., until only the asshole is left, to which the god assigns shame. Understandably, shame is unhappy with the accommodations. But it's too late. Shame curses. If Eros should ever seek to occupy that place, I will leave the body for good. This is why homosexuals have no shame, according to Aesop, or one of his Victorian translators. According to me, this is why there is no moral order to my sexual imagination, and why, praising my looks and hair and white flesh as I lie with you, then falling silent for days at a time, you really are the master of my pain. This next poem is one that Eric Smith and the team at the Sewanee Review gave a home to, gave a life to, so I'm really grateful. male beauty. I bought a bag of hard green pears today. I came home and sat in our room, listening to music for hours. Solo piano, things from France, from the beginning of the century. When we were very young, your forgiveness humiliated me. I knew you would be asleep when I got back. It is night outside and raining. It is the same night that fills the ruins. You are naked, drowsy, lost. Stay like that. In my favorite recordings, you can hear the pianist breathing. I'll end with a poem that takes place on a college campus. It's a poem about falling in love when you should be studying. Maybe it resonates. It's called French Novel. You were my second lover. You had dark eyes and hair like a painting of a man. We lay on our stomachs, reading books in your bed. I emailed my professor. I will be absent from French Novel due to sickness. You put on some piano music. Even though it was winter, we had to keep the window open day and night. The room was so hot, the air so dry, it made our noses bleed. With boots, we trekked through slush for a bottle of red wine we weren't allowed to buy. Our shirts unbuttoned under our winter coats. The French language distinguishes between the second of two and the second of many. Of course, we'd have other lovers. Snow fell in our hair. You were my second lover. Another way of saying this: you were the other, not another. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And now, Erin Khar.
I made it up here without tripping, which was like the thing that I was obsessed with while I was sitting there, was imagining myself tripping as I came up on stage. First, I just want to thank this whole entire staff of Sewanee for having me here. I know I'm going to try not to cry right now. I think that for all of us, this has been not just a fun, summer campy, and inspiring experience, but it's been transformative. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. I feel like it's been transformative for me as a writer and as a human. And I think I'm a little in love with every single person here. and just in awe of the level of talent and commitment to making art. And the beauty of that is that we get to see the reflection of what it means to be a fucking human on the page. And I'm just really grateful that I made it here. If you had told me 20, 25 years ago that I would be standing here reading from my book, there's no way I would have believed that. So I just want to thank you, and I've been joking with different people all week that like next week I'm just going to happen to book a vacation and book a room at the Sewanee Inn and just kind of like crash at the conference. So if you see me next year, you'll know that's what I've done. I'm reading from my book, Strung Out. Thank you. It's an abridged version of a chapter just to set it up. I mean, you can probably tell from the name there are a lot of drugs in it. Content warning, drug use, references to ideation and self-harm, and maybe some other things, but nothing too explicit, so just be mindful of that. In this chapter, I am mid-relapse, smoking a lot of crack, doing a lot of heroin, and in a really dark place. But spoiler alert, I made it out. Valentine's Day. Her mother just looks at her for a long minute, then removes a jade pendant from around her neck and hands it to her daughter. June, since your baby time, I wear this next to my heart. Now you wear it next to yours. It will help you know I see you. I see you. Amy Tan, The Joy Luck Club. My mom and I both read The Joy Luck Club when I was 17 and saw the movie together a few years later. There was one scene that resonated with us both. One of the mothers finally tells her daughter, I see you. We understood how this reflected our relationship, or more accurately, the hope we had for our relationship. Like the mother in the book, my mother had a jade pendant. It had belonged to her mother, but she didn't give it to me. Now, it was in the pawn shop, and she didn't know it was missing. What my mom did give me was a white gold Tiffany ID bracelet that was engraved. It read, I see you. She welled up with tears when she gave it to me and hugged me tighter than she had in years. I loved it, but could never bring myself to wear it because I knew she couldn't see me. She couldn't see the junkie, the one who lied and stole and let men touch her. She couldn't see the one who got high in the bathrooms of homes and Burger Kings and doctor's offices and gas stations and cars and delis and universities and garages and airports and department store fitting rooms. She couldn't see the one who sat on her hands holding her breath and counting the seconds when all she wanted to do was grab the box cutter and carve away until the crazy left her body in tiny particles. She couldn't see the one smoking crack in an airplane bathroom and hallucinating the corpse baby she'd aborted. She couldn't see the real me because if she did, she wouldn't love me because nobody can love a monster. I sat in my car and held the bracelet in the palm of my hand, tracing over the engraving with my finger. I dropped it in the cup holder, grabbed the small bag on the passenger seat, and got out. Halfway to the apartment door, I turned around to retrieve it. Taking a moment, I lit a cigarette. Jack was back at the apartment, deep in a nod. The thought of him there annoyed me. We were both in a race, only we were racing toward different things. He was racing toward a high, I was racing toward a low. My stomach rumbled and I couldn't remember the last time I ate. I struggled to recall what day of the week it was and remembered it was Valentine's Day. I didn't fucking care about hearts or chocolate or love. My self-loathing had grown, rising from my gut like bile. Self-hatred has a taste all its own. It's bitter and acidic and hard to choke down. The low I'd been chasing felt lower than ever before. I wanted to abandon all my senses and remember nothing. I wanted to get so low that I'd forget my name, forget my body. I read an article years ago about gambling addiction that said that gamblers were chasing a low, not a win, that they couldn't stop until they lost everything. When I read it, I got hot and dizzy with recognition because that was how I felt. Like I couldn't stop going lower, losing more, stripping myself down to nothing. I took a drag off my Parliament cigarette and blew smoke out the window, feeling my chest rattle. I'd been smoking more and more crack, and that rattle in my chest had been getting a little worse each day. It was raining, soft at first, and then persistently. The driver's side window of my Volvo was stuck open, and my arm was wet. Leading up to Valentine's Day, Jack and I had burned through his $10,000 royalty check in 10 days, and then had to scrounge for change to buy 2 Big Macs for $1 on Big Mac Mondays. I scammed Western Union to send myself money for my dad's credit card, and when he caught me, I said someone must have impersonated me. I pawned my computer, printer, television, DVD player, 3 guitars, 2 amps, my great-grandmother's wedding ring, and countless pieces of jewelry. I sold thousands of dollars worth of clothing, shoes, records, books, furniture, my grandmother's clown collection, and a Chagall painting. Yet right then, sitting in my car on Valentine's Day with the broken window, a soggy cigarette in my mouth, and a wet arm, I felt myself sinking to death in a new way. Spitting the cigarette out the window, I slapped the side of my face, grabbed the ICU bracelet and the rest of the jewelry, and buzzed Pedro, one of our crack dealers. The compulsion for crack led me to skipping this pawn shop altogether, arming myself with anything I thought he might accept as trade. It didn't always work. His apartment smelled like rice and beer, and he asked me to sit down. He loved the bracelet and put it on, wanted to keep it for himself, and I felt sick seeing it there on his arm. Before I left, he said, "Are you okay? You gotta slow down a little, baby girl." I felt even worse now. What kind of drug dealer tells you to slow down? And then I remembered that he was the second dealer to say that to me. I left with a handful of rocks and returned to my car. It rained harder, and I couldn't stop myself from crying. My cries became guttural, escaping the open window to a sleepy city that did not respond. I drove past a wall on the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and La Brea. I had hit that wall when I was 16 in a car accident. I could do it, end it, now, push the fucking pedal. The only thing that kept me driving straight past the wall, past that ending, was the thought I might accidentally kill someone else in the process. I returned home to find Jack passed out on the floor. I left him there and smoked a couple of rocks and went up to the roof of my building. I leaned against the low perimeter wall, looking down on Hollywood. Through the mist, against the lights of the city, I saw the corpse baby in a yellow shirt, floating, bloated, blue, carrying pieces of the sea just out of reach. And I wanted to reach her. I leaned my torso further over the edge of the wall and felt it press against my stomach. I could just lean forward a little more. I stuck my arms out and felt the outside of the wall. I shut my eyes and took a deep breath that made my chest rattle. "Hello?" a voice sounded behind me. I was startled and spun around to see Bob, the building's security guard, shining a flashlight toward me. "Someone called and said you were close to the edge, leaning over the ledge there. I don't want you to slip. Why don't you head back to your apartment? The roof is closed after 11. "Yes, of course. Sorry." We rode the elevator down in uncomfortable silence, my clothes soaked with mist and sweat. I watched Bob and his big, round, white face glance at me quickly and look away. I wondered who reported me, and I imagined it was the porn star with the mustache who parked next to me and had been watching my quick descent, or maybe the dwarf actor who lived down the hall. The absurdity of Los Angeles and the absurdity of it all made me laugh, and I knew the security guard must have thought I was crazy. I went back to my apartment and smoked more crack. At 6 a.m., I called Pete, my ex-boyfriend, but hung up. At 7 a.m., I called Pete and hung up again. At 8 a.m., Pete called me back, and I didn't pick up. I fell asleep. When I woke up and my stomach was cramping and I knew I was getting sick again already and I didn't have enough dope to get well, I saw Jack was up and making a pile of things to pawn. The pile was pretty pathetic. He left to go to his place to see if he had a check or something better to pawn, and I called Pete. Pete was the only person I could think of to call. Diana, my best friend, was sober. No one else knew I was using. They suspected, but they didn't know. But more than that, Pete knew me, the light parts and the dark parts too. "Hello? It's me," I said. "Are you okay?" "No." We waited each other out in silence. Pete caved. "Well, what's going on?" "I'm sick. I heard him sigh softly. I'm strung out, I don't even have $1, and I have to get well. I've got class at 4. The fact that I thought getting to class was ever going to happen was laughable, but I wasn't laughing. He remained silent and let me cry. My tears were sincere, but I also knew they would help me get what I needed. Go to my apartment, there's a spare key under the pot next to the door. Go into my room, the first door past the living room, and in the top dresser drawer, there should be some money there. There's not much, maybe $100. I nodded, but he couldn't hear me. I took down the address. Don't ever ask me to do this again. I'm here for you, I'll be here for you, but I'm not gonna help you get high again. Pete, I couldn't get anything else out. Thank you. After we hung up, I showered and put on an old blue sweatshirt that once belonged to Pete, and jeans, my skinny jeans, which were now my baggy jeans. The rattle in my chest was worse and I felt shivery. The dope sickness was settling in, spreading its way to every corner of my body. By the time I found a parking spot near the apartment, I was clammy and shaky and dry heaving. I'd never been inside this apartment. It wasn't actually Pete's. He'd been staying there while his friend David was out of town. Pete didn't get a place right after we broke up. He went out of town for work and had been staying with friends and house sitting, figuring out where he wanted to be. I found the building, which looked exactly like every other Spanish-style fourplex in the Miracle Mile. The key was where he said it would be. Being inside David's apartment was strange. I didn't know him that well. But it was nice and dark with the shades drawn. It felt safe because no one was home. I headed into the guest room, opened the top drawer of the dresser, and found exactly $100 folded in the corner next to Pete's boxers, 5 $20 bills. It smelled like Pete in there, the lavender toncho stick he used in his hair and Giton cigarettes, and the smell shook me. One of his shirts was on the edge of the bed, the blue plaid one. He might have been wearing it the first time we spoke, or the first night we split a burst of blue shake at Swingers, or the first night we sat in the rain in his car listening to Cure for Pain by Morphine and he kissed me. When I was with Pete, I believed we could escape LA together. I believed I could let him love me. I believed we could have a life together, and I believed it was all possible for me. I lay down on the bed shivering. Every muscle in my body was on the verge of contracting, like having restless leg syndrome all over. I held his shirt to my face and inhaled and smelled more of him, past the lavender toncho and the gitans, past the cloth into the scent of him, the one that came out of his pores, the one that slept next to me for 2.5 years, the one I let go of. My stomach cramped in waves, sharp and strong, and I curled myself into a ball. I didn't know which I wanted more of, his scent or heroin. The muted yellow light in the room soothed me. The smell of peat in the air around me soothed me. The blue plaid cotton against my skin soothed me. But the pull of heroin was stronger. I put the blue plaid shirt back on the edge of the bed, put the key back underneath the pot, and I left to go score. Thank you. Up next, we have the extremely talented R.A. Villanueva.
Fish heads. Yanked free at the gills from cartilage and spine, these fish heads my mother cleans, whose bodies she scales and throws all into salt water and crushed tamarind. At dinner, she alone will spoon out their eyes with her fingers and suck down each pair as we watch. See? This is why the three of you could never hide anything from me. As though those organs brought her sight to be soaked through the tongue. When I tell her that I've tried to make this stew from memory. She warns, don't waste what should be eaten. Reminds me of every delicate gift we have thrown away. Tilapia stomach best soured with vinegar, milk fish liver to melt against the dome of the mouth. That after church, a bucket of chicken soon became a blessing of wing gristle and skin, dark meat no one wanted to save. We refused to taste her gizzards and hearts fried in fat. Mocked the smell of pig blood curdled on the stove, wished gone her tripe steamed with beef bouillon and onion broth. After my brother and sister push aside bowls of baby squid in garlic ink, a gag at my mention of ducks in their shells boiled alive in brine. My mother believes I was the only one to share in such things, which maybe means, she says, in some former life, you and I were seabirds, or vampires, or wolves. I was thinking about what to read. I'm not like Richie. I don't plan my readings like years in advance, like the well-orchestrated thing. I'm sort of a mess, and the word that kept popping up as I thought about these weeks together is family. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this family. It's my dad, my son. Everything from this point on is from a new manuscript, which will be a book one day, I hope, but it's really indebted to this place, so thank you. The title of this poem is Annus Mirabilis, which means Year of Miracles. Just as a warning, it's about pregnancy and the difficulty of pregnancy. Annus Mirabilis. From the shallows, our son watches me play dead. He sits on river rocks, chucking sand and burying strawberries, while I float downstream, breath wound bright in the gut, a body both here and of other waters. The day he was born, midwives touched your face, your hands measured nerve and pulse, dripped saline along your thigh, numbered blades. Their ceremony for the first cuts. Before swaddling blankets, fever syrups, bath time, and mud. These are places the boy is ticklish. Lunette of the earlobe. Kneecaps, madrigal fat of his belly. Collarbone, toes. These words he knows but will not say. Yes. Horse. Sleep. White. Again, the boy cries himself hoarse as we sing through these hours right before dawn. First the alphabet, then twinkle, twinkle, little star, then the great pretender. Our words like foxes, like milk teeth. We can't hold him quiet. His body must, they say, learn now about hunger, about being alone. So we hum and shh into the yellow blue of Sunday. Melodies the shape of bruises and yearlings. Blood pudding and this worry, this awe we have no name for. And when he asks, make no mention of the names we save for the children we lost. His ghost siblings, their phantom initials. Of tests and lemongrass, nettle leaf and sharps forms in triplicate clinics painted with lambs, comets, maps to nerve meridians, hearts, say nothing. Never speak of that quiet after the kicking stopped. Believe in time. He'll learn our cells betray each miracle and wild conundrum they're coded to bear. And if he needs an answer, give him morning mass off West 16th, how aisle and chancel roared with lilies and cornets, how we dared a new unknown to find us there in song. My son's having a lot of trouble sleeping. He has lots of nightmares. I said one day, I'm like, same. So what helps him go to sleep? He puts songs on repeat. This dark is the same dark as when you close. This dark is the same dark as when you close your eyes, I whisper to our son while he catches his breath. It is well past midnight, and he will not describe the face of what he fights to unsee. By his feet, the green glow of a nightlight retreats into blue, slips softly to red. Above his bed, notes we once had time to tape onto the latch of his lunchbox. Flights of origami swans, throwing stars, and fortune tellers. When your turn comes to lie beside him, this is the bridge he's set to repeat. Always an angel, never a god. Always an angel, never a god. And so you hold him close like a saint shadowed by the axe, cradling her own haloed head in her hands. Before, Penelope would only go to sleep listening to the audiobook of The Very Hungry Caterpillar over and over again. The only thing that would put her to bed was the Rufus Wainwright version of the Jeff Buckley version of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. Hallelujah, sings the choir, and I reach low. Hallelujah, while our daughter snores on my shoulder, drools onto my neck. What dreams I can remember are the dreams that frighten me most. Ice and hairline cracks on the wings near takeoff, a white-gray mass among contrast studies, nurses leaving us tightening their smiles. There is a theater blistered by bomblets, a schoolyard scattered with phones, peaches, and triage tents. There are letters left in the desert and acres of cypress burning, Patmos and the Morns, wellheads and the abyssal plains of the Gulf burning still. I know this child will learn to curse the sound of my voice. My son drew this for me for Father's Day. And I said, Xavier, why did you draw me a skull? And he said, the skull is wearing cat ears because you like skulls, Dad. Thank you again for listening. This is my last poem. We're actually going to read this one together. If you are a poet, if you wrote essays, nonfiction, please raise your left hand. You have a line. Your line is, the world has always been ending. If you wrote fiction, stories, if you're working on a novel, if you wrote a play or working on a play, you have the answer. Raise your right hand. Your reply is yes. Thank you, Sawani. Thank you all for being here. The title of this poem is Mass. The world has always been ending, I said, and you said, yes. Today, half lost on the senderos, among its dry brush and thorns, I hear my mother's voice in the rocks. I see in the rust plains and lava bulbs and cairns stacked as markers, her cells massing upon her heart, lungs running riot along her sternum. Soon the nights of marrow talk, of jabs and the 7 last words, serum nights with vials, the joyful mysteries, thumbs on decades falling asleep. I light a match with the end of another, warm her poisons and gauze for the new year. She said, and I said yes. Today we walk, bearing hymnals and lilacs for the gazebo green, for stairwells and chalks drawn to mark the hem of a body. We bring each place its dirge in the shape of teeth, slugs, a tongue pressed to concrete, its fugue scored for sirens and windpipes, pellet guns, and bells. We bless the blue of this wide winter sky above our city for once. Let me more to us than smoke, more than blood starved of air beneath skin, more than anthems hollowed or a field for stars dying and dead. He said, and you said, today they are burning the names of the boys they are shooting in the street. This because we and they know ashes mean undone leads and muzzles loosened, floodlights and flares, eyes doused with milk. At the chapel for Vespers, a woman holds a globe she has decked with poppies and birch tar and foil. Her son colors in a book of heralds and dragons, traces his palm. Now the Magnificat. Now I am down on my knees, sure only that the fires will come again and again. Thank you. Keep it going for the stellar Laura Maylene Walter.
Hi, everyone. I am the last fellow reading at the last fellow reading, so thank you all so much for being here. Back when my book came out in the pre-vaccine pandemic era, and I was awash in Zoom literary events and Zoom book launches, I don't think I could have looked forward and ahead to imagine standing on the stage reading for all of you in person, so I'm really honored. And of course, thank you to the Sewanee staff and faculty and everyone in my workshop who's been so great. These have been really unforgettable and meaningful 2 weeks, and I know I'm not alone in feeling like that. So I'm going to read first from my debut novel, Body of Stars, and I will read the opening page or so, then I'll skip ahead to later in the book and read a very short passage later, but no spoilers. And I should say this is a novel set in a world where the bodies of women and girls predict the future. And they live in a society that has very restrictive and limited views of gender and gender roles, all of which are things that my characters come up against. After I read a little bit from this book, I'll end with something new. But for now, we'll start in the beginning with Body of Stars. From the time of my birth, my brother Miles read me like a map, tracing the patterns of freckles and birthmarks to see my future and to learn something of his own. In those early years, my body was as much his as it was mine. To share meant letting him lift the back of my tank top or sweater so he could search my skin for a hint of what was to come. I never complained because I believed we were the same, that the predictions marked on my body were part of him too. We were partners working in a discipline that required practice. He'd approach me at the breakfast table or in the upstairs hallway and ask if he could examine me again, as if my markings might have shifted, a phenomenon we both knew wasn't possible, at least not yet. When I was too old for Miles to see me shirtless, he studied my arms, focusing on the constellation of moles near my left elbow. "You're lucky," he told me, "you know what will happen." It was true. I did, as a girl, have this blueprint of my life imprinted on my skin. At sleepovers, my friends and I stripped to our underwear to read our own futures. We lingered over our lower backs, the place for love and romance. "You'll fall in love more than once," Marie told Cassandra, and Cassandra in turn studied Marie's back and said, "You'll live with a woman," which none of us at that age understood. All we knew was that our lives were speckled in advance on our skin, as it had been for our mothers, as it was for our sisters, while our brothers and fathers were left in the dark. Over the years, Miles memorized me every inch and documented my marks in his notebook. That notebook was thick, with unlined pages and a pale blue cover. Sometimes I'd sneak into his room and flip through it. The little dots of ink pressed so hard into the page, they made a series of bumps like a book for the blind. That summer and early autumn was a time of uncertainty, of risk and wonder. My hips widened and I grew taller and gained some weight. I understood these changes extended beyond my physical body. Soon everything would change. My predictions, my expectations, my future, my entire life. I'll skip forward a bit. On the mountain, I read a fantasy novel about a society in which markings didn't exist. No one could predict the future. The characters lived in a state of unknowing, waiting for everything to unfold before them without the benefit of fate or prediction. I read that book straight through in one sitting. How bizarre, how breathtaking to not know what would come. I placed a long-distance call to my mother the same day so I could talk to her about it. She could tell I was shaken. She kept saying, "It's only a book, it's not real." But I was unsettled. In that book, both girls and boys grew up blank. They were the same. My mother at that time was working with a group of girls in another country who'd been denied education because their markings indicated they would grow up to become homemakers. What's the point in educating them, the teachers argued, if they won't use their schooling? My mother fought for those girls. She bought them books, pencils, notebooks. She sounded out words with them. She taught them how to write, and thus gave them the whole world of literature. After we hung up, I spent a long time thinking of what my mother was doing, how she altered the future even slightly. Those girls would grow up to be homemakers just as their markings predicted, but they'd also be changed by their ability to read. They could perhaps pick up the same novel I just finished and imagine different worlds out there, different ways to shape the same life. I tried to imagine a new world of my own making. I tried to imagine it back then after speaking to my mother, and again that first night home. I envisioned a world where girls could go out at night and where they could create their own futures. It was an outrageous dream, but I lost myself in it anyway. At home, my father was waiting for me in the living room. "Are you ready to talk?" he asked. My mother was rushing toward us on a train at that very moment. She was growing closer by the hour. I could feel her approach in my body. I said I wanted to wait for her. "All right." He looked hurt or maybe irritated. "I suppose you always were more her daughter than mine." His words stung. I wanted to shake him, to make him see what I was really trying to say, what useless repetition ran in a loop in my head. I'm sorry. But I wouldn't apologize to my father, not then and not in the future either. It might take the rest of my life, but I was going to shed that burden, wash it off my skin. Because that was what I wished for most of all, a metamorphosis, the ability to wake up transformed, for my body, my life, to be my own. Thanks. And I will conclude with a rather short excerpt from the new novel I'm working on. It explores youth and beauty and aging and how we perceive time and how we perceive reality. So it's just, about some small and simple things. But one of the characters is a professional mermaid performer. And one of my favorite things about being a writer is it gives me the excuse to research things that I might never explore in my actual regular life. So for this book, I applied for grants to go watch the Weeki-Washi mermaids in Florida. And and I also took a class from a mermaid performer so I could swim in the tail and learn how to do that. So really fascinating world. If anyone wants to talk mermaids later, please come find me. So this is just a very short section. It comes later in the book, but it takes us back in time to when my character, Carly, first puts on a tail and first swims in the spring that will end up being her place of employment for many years. She was a natural. The staff all said so, from the instructors in the water to the employee passing out tails to the attendant who'd served them drinks. Carly went deeper and farther than she was meant to, and once she even dipped past the divider rope, but no one called her back. They saw what she was. Carly couldn't believe it had taken her this long to figure it out for herself. The water was so clear she could see the bottom of the spring, which was once thickly carpeted in eelgrass, but was now slimed with algae instead, part of the spring's slow decline. The Timucua, the native peoples killed off by war and disease, once called these waters liquid gold. Now, runoff from housing developments, golf courses, and shopping plazas pumped nitrates into the water. The spring was suffering. Millions of years ago, all of Florida was underwater, sea-drenched and churning with prehistoric creatures. One day in the future, it would be so again. History was cyclical, the world waiting to fold into itself and revert to its beginnings. Carly was no more than a fragile human holding her breath underwater, pushing against the years fanning behind her and the years still to come. She stayed under for one long lungful of breath, the longest she'd ever denied herself the pleasure of oxygen. She was not 21 anymore. She was ageless. She swam draped in eelgrass, her skin barnacled, her eyes red, monstrous, soulless, a seductress of men, of women, of everyone, an immortal being birthed from froth and foam. When at last Carly surfaced, Danielle was sitting on the dock. She'd already taken off her tail and was squeezing water from her hair. "God, you must be freezing," she called, frowning down at Carly. "It felt like you were down there for years." Thank you, everyone. And that's it.